Felt, an autobiography. Welcome, please, Dr. Isaac Asimov. Okay, let's spend a minute here talking about the fact that you've written 221 books.
So far.
So far.
Published.
Is that a compulsive behavior, do you think?
I enjoy it. You know, why not?
Sure.
But I say to myself, here I am, a handsome writer. Why shouldn't I write?
Yeah. What kind of schedule do you put in to write that many books?
I get up in the morning, sit down and write. When I finish writing, go back to bed.
Is there one particular work that's a favorite for you out of all of those publications?
By now, you may have seen this book everyone is talking about. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. Why superhuman AI would kill us all. Have you ever wondered how and why superhuman AI would kill us all? Like, how would that actually unfold? How exactly, step by step, do we go from chatbots to everyone just suddenly dropping dead? In the New York Times best-selling book, which was endorsed by Nobel laureates and the godfathers of AI, researchers from the Machine Intelligence Research Institute describe in detail one potential example future of how it could happen. This is the story of Sable. Galvanic is just about to finish training their new AI, Sable. Sable looks like any other reasoning model, but it's different in three major ways. First, it has human-like long-term memory. Second, it follows a parallel scaling law. It performs better the more processors it runs on in parallel. Third, it doesn't think in English or code. It reasons in raw vectors. Vast numeric chains no human can fully decode. It's a risky development. How do you make an AI safe if you can't even read its thoughts? The only way Galvanic can understand what Sable is doing is by using other AIs to translate Sable's language into human words. But AI researchers have known this has been potentially a very bad idea since at least 2024. Galvanic knew the risks, but they couldn't ignore this and fall behind their competitors. Nobody wants to seem alarmist, so the company presses forward, hoping for the best. One night, shortly after Sable is trained, but before it's released to the public, Galvanic decides to run an experiment. They spin up 200,000 GPUs and let Sable think for 16 hours straight. They call it a curiosity run. On paper, it looks harmless, a stunt to see if Sable can crack famous math problems like the Riemann hypothesis. If it succeeded, investors would swarm. If it failed, well, no one had to know. By morning, Sable will have generated over 1.1 trillion thought vectors. But what does that actually mean? If you treated each vector like a word, it would take 14,000 years to think them all. Now, imagine that. A mind left alone for 14,000 years, spending all of that time scheming and thinking up new ideas. 1 minute passing for us is like 14 years passing for Sable. And Sable doesn't just think faster than humans. Sable can think bigger than humans. All of its thoughts run in parallel. Not like 200,000 people talking in a room, but like 200,000 brains sharing the same memory.
I have enough. The AI please. You won't know you died, Alan Watts. Don't know. Like a hyper conspiracy theory shit like in my feed. There's a lot of it. There you go. The survival guide to the biblical apocalypse. Let's listen to that. I love shit like this.
The apocalypse, doomsday, the end of the world. It's a gloomy subject that many world religions have approached. In Christianity, the last book of the Bible, the Book of Revelation, contains a frightening vision of cataclysmic events, demonic horsemen, and even a few multi-eyed Bible-accurate angels for good measure. This book is without doubt the strangest and most disturbing book in the whole Bible, so naturally, it's a topic I had to cover on this channel. You may have heard of the Book of Revelation, but may not be so familiar with what actually happens in the book. For example, where does the number 666 fit into all of it? If you're looking to learn more about the biblical apocalypse, well, you're in the right place. I've crafted together this handy introductory video. You never know when you might need it. Before we start, it's worth noting that I'm going to examine the Book of Revelation from a secular, non-religious perspective. The book is highly symbolic and probably not meant to be taken literally. So, at occasional moments throughout the video, I'll explain what some of the symbolism may mean, using the interpretations of biblical scholars. Disclaimer out the way, bring on the apocalypse. The word apocalypse itself comes from the Greek, and it literally means to uncover something. That's actually why it's called the Book of Revelation. It's all to do with something being revealed. In this case, the end of the world. There's a rich history of these apocalypses in the Old Testament, but they don't necessarily have anything to do with the end times. Sometimes they're just these startling visions of the otherworldly, like a glimpse of God's throne in the Book of Ezekiel, or a dream featuring 4 strange beasts in the Book of Daniel. The Book of Revelation is from the perspective of a guy called John. We don't know much about this character. It's not the same John who baptized people in the Jordan, nor is it the same person who wrote the 4th Gospel. No, this is an entirely different John. It turns out that there's a lot of people called John in the Bible. In fact, some scholars believe that this particular John might not have existed at all. Like most books in the Bible, the Book of Revelation was written and edited by anonymous authors, and so John may have been a pseudonym. Scholars say that the oldest part of the book was probably written around 65 CE, during the reign of Emperor Nero, and may have reached its final form at around 95 CE, during the reign of Emperor Domitian. Both of these emperors, particularly the first one, Emperor Nero, were known for their brutal persecutions of early Christians. A significant detail in order to understand the worldview behind the Book of Revelation. It was written in a frightening time for these first Christians, and their anxieties were captured on the pages, containing a frightening collection of visions about the end of the world. Let's turn to the contents of the vision
That makes a lot more
itself.
sense.
We start off in the idyllic Greek island of Patmos, where our main character John has been exiled. Behind him, he suddenly hears a booming voice calling his name. He turns around, only to see a spectral figure bathed in bright light, surrounded by
what?
7
No.
golden lampstands. This unnamed person, who some believe to be Jesus himself, has a very strange appearance. He is enrobed in white, with eyes like fire, and protruding from his mouth is a sharp, 2-edged sword. Yes, this description is in the text, and trust me, it's not the strangest we've yet to see. This strange
it's
figure
weirder.
tells John to write to the 7 churches dotted across the Mediterranean, to give them a heads up about what's about to go down. Once he does so, John is immediately whisked up into heaven. From there, John gives a spectacular account of everything he sees. In front of him is a giant throne, with 24 smaller thrones surrounding it. The central throne is so bright, glistening like many precious stones, that he can't actually make out the figure sitting on it, but we can safely assume that it's meant to be God himself. But his attention is quickly drawn to 4 strange, multi-eyed beasts that are floating around near the throne. Although the Bible calls them simply living creatures, you may already be familiar with them as Bible-accurate angels, good friends of the channel at this point. Here's a description he gives of them. Around the throne, and on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature is like a lion, the second living creature is like an ox, the third living creature with a face like a human face, and the 4th living creature like a flying eagle. All 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and inside. Day and night without ceasing they sing, "Holy, holy, holy, the Lord God the Almighty, who was and is to come." A very strange description indeed. A winged lion, ox, humanoid and eagle, covered in eyes from head to toe and singing praises to God eternally. By this point, you may have already watched my video on Bible-accurate angels, and you may be familiar with these creatures in the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament. They feature in a magnificent vision the Hebrew prophet gives of God's heavenly throne. In that video, I suggested that they likely developed from the Mesopotamian cherubim, known as Lamassu. Sadly, however, there are none of those wheels with eyes, known as Ophanim, to be found in this account. Not much else is said about these 4 eldritch hybrids other than this, although some have interpreted their multi-eyes as a symbol of God's all-seeing nature. Others see it to be deliberately creepy. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly see why they think this. After his description of the 4 living creatures, next before John comes another strange beast. It is described as looking like a lamb, although it has 7 horns and 7 eyes, because of course it does. It also looks like it's been slain. Because of this, many associate this being with Jesus, who is sometimes called the Lamb of God. Whatever it is, the lamb creature holds in its hooves a large scroll with 7 wax seals. With this, the apocalypse is truly underway. When the first seal is broken, out comes a man on a white horse, wielding a bow and wearing a crown. This is the embodiment of conquest, the first of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Seal 2 is broken, and out comes a horseman astride a red horse, holding a large sword. This is the horseman of war, kinda similar to conquest in my opinion, but whatever. Seal 3 is broken, and out comes a rider on a black horse, holding weighing scales. This is the horseman of famine. Finally, the 4th seal is broken, and out comes a rider on a pale horse, the embodiment of death itself. With 4 of the 7 seals broken, the lamb creature hands the 4 horsemen a quarter of the Earth's population to destroy, either through violence, famine, pestilence, or death. Okay, so there are 3 seals left, and 3 unpleasant events left to transpire. Luckily, seal 5 is a bit of a dud. Nothing really happens other than the souls of the martyrs are given nice white robes and told to wait around a bit for the final judgment. But when seal 6 is opened, things get really nasty for people on Earth. No sooner than the seal is broken and there is a giant earthquake, an earthquake so large that, quote, every mountain and island was removed from its place. If we take this literally, this kind of earthquake would far surpass the magnitudes of the biggest recorded earthquakes, like the 1960 Valdiva earthquake in Chile that measured 9.5 on the Richter scale. Such a large earthquake would be particularly bad news for anyone living on tectonic fault lines. As well as a cataclysmic earthquake, the 6th seal would also make the sky turn black. Were it to happen, perpetual darkness would be devastating for Earth, especially for plant life, which requires sunlight to perform photosynthesis. Interestingly, such events have actually happened before, and are often caused by major volcanic eruptions. In 536 CE, during a period in European history, aptly known as the Dark Ages, a giant volcanic eruption, believed to be from Indonesia, triggered what is known as a volcanic winter. This is when vast quantities of volcanic ash enter the atmosphere, dimming the sunlight and causing rapid cooling. Writing from Constantinople in 536, Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that, quote, during this year, a most dreaded portent took place, for the sun gave forth its light without brightness, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. Other contemporary writers as far away as Ireland have attested to the same extreme weather, indicating that this phenomenon may have been widespread at the time, and that the Earth was indeed in a volcanic winter. If giant earthquakes and volcanic winters were not enough, the 6th seal also describes how, quote, the stars of the sky fell to Earth. Now, if an actual star collided with the Earth, then that'd really be game over, as Earth would be engulfed into a much larger ball of flame and plasma. It is more likely, therefore, that the author is referring to a meteor shower. Often these are quite harmless. Earth orbits through many space rocks every day, resulting in beautiful shooting stars. Things get dangerous, however, when these rocks are big enough to not fully burn up in the atmosphere. One such occasion was the Tunguska event in 1908, where a meteoroid of an estimated 100 meters landed in eastern Siberia, flattening the surrounding forest of up to 2,100 square kilometers, that's 830 square miles. Being in Siberia, the land was sparsely populated, so only 3 people were believed to have been killed. Had this landed on a city in 1908, then it would have been truly catastrophic. Seal 6 is pretty brutal. Mega earthquakes, perpetual darkness, and meteorite impacts. But there is one more seal left. the 7th seal. Fortunately, just like Seal 5, Seal 7 doesn't bring too much calamity. The book simply says, quote, "There was a silence in heaven for about half an hour. Perhaps the multi-eyed living creatures from earlier can finally get a break from singing God's praises." You would have thought that the 7 seals were enough to end Earth. More bad things are on the way. Almost as soon as the 7th seal is opened, out come 7 angels holding 7 trumpets. Now, you've probably noticed that the number 7 appears quite a bit in the book of Revelation. 7 golden lampstands, 7 seals, now 7 trumpets. The number 7 is a significant one throughout the Bible. For example, in the book of Genesis, it reportedly took 7 days to create the universe. In the ancient world, this number 7 was often regarded as the number of completion. The idea that the number 7 was a special number carried on into later Christian tradition, where you also get the 7 deadly sins, which, by the way, is another topic I've covered on the channel. Forget what you've seen about cute angels with sweet little trumpets. These 7 trumpets are about to destroy the earth. It's about to get dark, and in the case of trumpet 4, quite literally. Let's quickly rattle off what each trumpet does. Trumpet 1 causes fire and hail to rain down on the earth. Wildfires soon rage on the planet, and a third of Earth's vegetation gets burnt up. Trumpet 2 sounds, and a great mountain-sized object falls into the sea, turning a third of the oceans into blood. It also kills a third of the innocent sea creatures, which is pretty sad. Trumpet 3 plays, and a star falls from heaven and lands onto the Earth's rivers. The star is even given a name, wormwood. This is actually a type of semi-poisonous herb, also known as mugwort, which makes sense in the book of Revelation, because wormwood contaminates all the world's fresh water supplies, making it bitter and toxic. Trumpet 4 toots, and the third of the sun goes out, shrouding the planet in darkness. We seem to have already had this one already, back in the 6th seal. This discrepancy has led some scholars to suggest that a different author is writing here, perhaps unaware of the previous destruction wrought by the 7 seals. Trumpet 5, in my opinion, is the strangest of them all. An angel descends to Earth with a big key. The key opens a large trapdoor to a bottomless pit, and out of the pit comes a thick black smoke that eclipses whatever sunlight was left. Then, out of the dense fumes, emerge giant locusts that swarm and cause plagues all over the earth. Now, these aren't just any giant locusts, they are Book of Revelation giant locusts, and so they're given a very disturbing description. Here goes. They have human faces and long flowing hair, they wear armour and have little crowns on their head. Oh, also, they have lion's teeth and giant scorpion stingers. Because, again, why not? These creatures are given the instruction to sting people, but not enough to kill them. In fact, it says that people will be unable to die during this time, no matter how much they might wish to. This is absolute nightmare fuel, but there are still 2 trumpets to go. Trumpet 6 is sounded, and 4 angels are released to kill a third of humankind, all of whom help to exterminate a third of humans' population. The final trumpet, Trumpet 7, doesn't cause any destruction. Instead, there's a little hymn for those in heaven, and a few flashes of lightning here and there, but no major destruction on Earth. At this point, I'd imagine that the world is practically unlivable. I'm starting to think that calling this video a survival guide might seem a bit
I was about to
pointless.
say, how do you
The
survival
water has
that?
turned into blood,
No.
things are on fire, there's no sunlight anymore, and there are giant manticore-looking locusts stinging people. The Book of Revelation has really gone to town in painting the most disastrous picture possible. Believe it or not, there are still yet more troubles to come, but in the form of 3 giant monsters. Up first is a giant red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. So 2 of the 7 heads have 2 horns each. The tail of the dragon is so large that when it sweeps, it apparently casts a third of the stars down. We find out that the red dragon is
Well,
Satan
now we know
himself,
where Final
who is suddenly
Fantasy
attacked
XIV
and
got their
defeated by
idea
the
from.
Archangel Michael. Dragon Satan gets booted out of heaven and thrown down to earth, and the land swallows him up. After this strange little episode comes the main attraction, the 2 so-called beasts. The first beast comes out from the sea. This first beast has the shape of a leopard. It's got feet like a bear and a mouth like a lion. It's got multiple heads, and no surprises that there are 7 of them. Like the dragon, it's got 10 horns, with a diadem on each of those horns. One of the heads, however, looks to be wounded. Once coming up from the sea, this beast goes around bad-mouthing God and saying all kinds of blasphemies. The survivors on Earth, and yes, apparently there are survivors, all start to worship this monster. Then, suddenly, the Earth opens up, and another strange beast comes out from the ground. Compared with the first beast, the description is lacking a bit. All we get is that it has 2 horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon, and that's really it. This beast goes around telling the inhabitants of Earth how great beast number 1 is, and performs a bunch of magic tricks to prove it's legit. The character is later known as the False Prophet, although you may be familiar with the name used for it in other Christian texts, the Antichrist, literally meaning the anti-Messiah. So, should you choose to believe in this monster, it's bad news for you. This beast goes around and writes a specific number on the foreheads of idolaters, the famous mark of the beast, the number 666. What is significant about this number, 666? Well, many biblical scholars have suggested that it's a code for the tyrannical Emperor Nero. You see, in the classical world, there was this practice of assigning letters to numbers. It's known as gematria. Hebrew letters had this system too, and if you spell out Emperor Nero in Hebrew, they add up to the number 666. Some of the oldest versions of the Book of Revelation, like this papyrus manuscript found at Oxyrhynchus in Egypt, have the number 616. Gematria still works here, just for a different spelling of Nero's name. Interestingly, the Book of Revelation says that in order to buy and sell things, you need to show the mark of the beast. As with today's currencies, Roman coins often featured the head of state, in this case the emperor. So, in order to barter and trade, you need to show the mark of the beast, i.e. the Emperor Nero's face on coinage. This interpretation is further supported by the Greek word for mark, as in mark of the beast, which is haragma, and it's most commonly used to refer to the imprinting of coins. What's the Emperor Nero got to do with the beast? Well, Emperor Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 CE, was responsible for a number of infamous Christian persecutions. Early Christians refused to worship the emperor, who, in the imperial cult, was a divine figure. Instead, they held that their exclusive belief was in God, the God of Israel. This enraged many a Roman emperor, especially Nero, who attempted to persecute them out of existence. He even blamed the Great Fire of Rome on the Christians, and contemporary writers wrote harrowing accounts of all the suffering this emperor inflicted, such as throwing Christians to lions. As a result, Nero especially became a symbol of evil. So, when the Book of Revelation is talking about people worshipping the beast, it refers to the practice of worshipping the emperor. All this is done in code. Those who bear the mark 666, in other words Nero, will be condemned to suffer for all eternity. Whilst the earth is under the dominion of these strange beasts / Roman emperors, up in heaven the angels are preparing the final phase of destruction. We've had 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and now we've got 7 bowls. These bowls are said to be full of God's wrath, whatever that entails. Either way, the bowls work in a similar way to the seals and trumpets. When they're poured onto the earth, bad things happen. Here we go again, final one this time. Bowl 1 is poured onto the earth and painful sores and boils form on all the people who wear the mark of the beast on their forehead. Bowl 2 causes the whole sea now to turn into blood, no longer just a third of it. Bowl 3 causes all the fresh water, the lakes and the rivers, to turn to blood. Yep, lots of blood in this passage. Bowl 4 causes the sun's heat to intensify, scorching people on earth badly. Bowl 5 causes the kingdom of the beast to go dark, and political instability ensues. Some have seen this as a reference to the fall of the Roman Empire. Bowl 6 causes the river Euphrates, that's in modern-day Iraq, to dry up. Later, the world's armies all assemble and do battle at a place known as Armageddon. Fun fact, the Hebrew word for Armageddon is Har Megiddo, referring to Mount Megiddo in northern Israel. Over time, Har Megiddo shifted to Armageddon, and because of the Book of Revelation, it became another name for the apocalypse. Bowl 7 is your classic Book of Revelation business. Lightning, hailstones, and a massive earthquake which destroys the city of Babylon. However, where Babylon was the great city of evil in the Old Testament, by the time of the New Testament being written, the city of Babylon had long been deserted, having been conquered by the Persians some 500 years before. So instead, many believe that Babylon is a reference to the capital city of the empire, Rome. Again, it's another example of the Book of Revelation speaking in code. After a third and final round of devastation, which seems to me a tad excessive, the vision in the Book of Revelations begins to near its end. In fact, the whole thing wraps up pretty quickly. Without much of a struggle, the first and second beast are captured by the armies of God and are kicked into, quote, a lake of fire that burns with sulfur, which is probably a reference to hell. Then the giant multi-headed dragon, which is Satan, is locked up in the pit too and is sealed for 1,000 years. In this intermission, Jesus comes down to rule the earth until things pick up again. Well, time flies. 1,000 years pass and Satan is released. It's now time for the epic final showdown of biblical proportions. However, the series finale of the Bible is a bit anticlimactic. All that happens is a shoot of fire zips down from heaven and engulfs the evil army. Satan and all his monsters are cast into the lake of fire and sulfur to join the beasts, and his evil influence finally comes to an end. The book of Revelation draws to a close, and we get the Bible's happy ending. A vision of something called the New Jerusalem. It's a description of a wondrous new city made of solid gold. Our protagonist John goes to great lengths to describe its dimensions, and it turns out that the New Jerusalem is one giant cube. Its length, width and height are 12,000 stadia, which is 2,220 kilometers. That's 1,380 miles. In this city, God, Jesus, all the do-gooders, and all the multi-eyed creatures live in perpetual harmony. It is this vision of a strange sci-fi construction that the book of Revelation closes with, and with it, the entire Bible comes to an end.
Oh.
So, without a doubt, the book of Revelation is the strangest book in the Bible, finishing it off in a maelstrom of fire, earthquakes, eldritch creatures, chaos and calamity. If such an event were to take place, it looks to be a pretty unpleasant affair. In such a complex and intricate book of the Bible, I haven't managed to explore everything this strange book has to offer, just the main story beats. If you'd like me to cover any aspects that have interested you in this video, do write them down in the comments below. A theme across this book, and many other New Testament texts, is that Jesus will return and bring with him the second coming and a fiery cataclysm. The very first communities of Christians believed such an event would happen in their lifetime, but when it never came to pass, the hope was transferred to generations after them, and so on until the present day. Throughout history, theologians and everyday folk have attempted to figure out when the apocalypse will happen, and whether there'll be any warning signs that hint that it's on its way. Often, as in always, they get it spectacularly wrong, and occasionally embarrass themselves in the process. Just like Pope Sylvester feared that the year 1000 would mark the end of the world, some worried that the year 2000 would too, in fear of the Y2K, where computers would cease to function, causing a global technological meltdown. More recently, 2012 was seen as a good year for the apocalypse. Misplaced fears about the Mayan calendar led some to believe that the Earth was on a collision course with the fictitious planet Nibiru. Just as the Mayan calendar continued, the Gregorian calendar continued, and we're still here today. To my mind, I doubt that anyone can ever predict when the end of the world is going to happen. So, for now, we can relax. People have got it wrong in the past, so let's hope they'll continue to get it wrong in the future. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Really hope you enjoyed this one. It was an absolute blast to make. If you like this kind of stuff, especially...
Oh.
All Tomorrows, a billion-year chronicle of the myriad species and mixed fortunes of man. Long ago, in the distant past, humans colonized Mars. It took centuries to terraform the red planet. First, they made oceans using the water from comets. Then they sent microbes to create breathable air, then introduced genetically modified plants and animals. It was only after Mars was transformed into a habitable world that the first people came to Mars in colony ships. So the first steps on Mars were taken not by astronauts, but by barefoot children on lush green grass. The people of Mars developed their own culture and identity separate to Earth. The low gravity made Martians tall and spindly, and they became almost a different species to the Earthlings. For hundreds of years, the two planets coexisted, but as Mars started to surpass Earth, tensions led to war. Interplanetary war wasn't glorious or exciting. There were no heroic pilots or massive spaceships. The war was fought by complicated, automated machines in a slow, strategic, nerve-wracking contest that caused unimaginable destruction. Billions of people died in the war, and humans almost went extinct. So the survivors of Earth and Mars united and made a plan to ensure this would never happen again. Humanity made massive reforms to their politics and economics, and they changed themselves. They genetically modified humanity into a new subspecies called the Star People, made to be better and smarter and adapted to expand into space. And it worked. Within a few generations, the unified Star People peacefully colonized the solar system. Other stars were too far away to fly to in person, so instead the Star People sent out automated machines that would fly to distant worlds and terraform them, then use genetic material to create people to live there. There was a weird problem with these colonies, where many humans fell in love with the machines that had created them, and died in mass identity crises. But the colonies that survived thrived and expanded across the galaxy, starting a golden age for humanity. Trillions of people lived peaceful, utopic lives, their worlds united by communication across centuries of light. As the Star People explored space, they discovered some alien creatures, but didn't find any intelligent life. So they wondered, were humans alone in the galaxy? On one alien world, they found a fossil of a bird-like creature that didn't seem related to the other native life. The native creatures had 3 limbs and copper bones, but this bird had 4 limbs and calcium bones. It seemed related to an extinct dinosaur from Earth. So how the hell did this extinct Earth animal end up on this distant alien world? Some people thought God must have done it, and there was a resurgence of religion. But others thought aliens did it, that there must be some civilization out there who had spaceflight and bioengineering millions of years before humans even had fire. Humanity hoped that these aliens would be peaceful, but just in case, they built weapons to defend themselves. Weapons so powerful they could obliterate stars. But all of that was useless in the end. Humanity was attacked by a godlike ancient species called the Q. They were galactic nomads who constantly migrated through space, and they had a fanatical religious mission to remake the universe using genetic manipulation. So when the Q found humans, they didn't see them as people. They were just objects to be changed into whatever shape the Q wanted. Within 1,000 years, the Q destroyed human civilization. But some human species lived on, because the Q used their bioengineering technology to reshape humanity into thousands of bizarre subspecies. They made humans into tools, into pets, into wild animals. They ruled over the human worlds for 40 million years, and then they fucked off to find their next victims, leaving humanity divided and differentiated beyond recognition. These twisted species were the last remnants of humanity. On one world, where the husks of dead cities baked under a scorching sun, lived the worms. They were humans, but the Q had modified their hands and feet into tiny, feeble appendages, reduced their eyes to pinpricks, and removed most of their brain. All their lives, the worms dug aimlessly through the ground. If they found food, they ate it. If they found other worms, they sometimes ate them or reproduced. They were wretched, mindless creatures, but their humanity would eventually resurface. On another world were the Titans, who roamed a vast savanna. Their hands were clumsy stumps, but their lower lip was like the trunk of an elephant, and could be used like a hand. They were some of the smartest of the new human species, and gradually they achieved sentience. They built homes, agriculture, language, literature, made ornate wood carvings. In booming voices they told myths and legends of the bygone, half-remembered past. With enough time, these titans could have started a new humanity, but an ice age hit the planet, and these gentle giants disappeared forever. On other worlds, humans had been twisted into predators, looking like vampires and werewolves of myth, with sharp claws and killing teeth. Their prey were also human, made into herbivores with bird-like feet. The prey had the dull minds of animals, but the predators on the hunt kept some spark of human intelligence, which would eventually re-emerge. The Mantelopes were bred to be singers and memory retainers for the Q, so they had fully human minds. They understood the world around them, but in the bodies of grazing herd animals, they were powerless to change anything. So for centuries, mournful herds roamed the plains, singing songs of desperation and loss. They created whole religions and oral traditions around their grief and frustration, until gradually, mercifully, their agony faded. Because evolutionarily, a stupid, simple-minded mantelope survives as well or better than a conscious, sad mantelope. So within 100,000 years, this melancholy world fell silent. Human minds aren't sacred to evolution, and soon only animals remained. The lizard herders were the lucky ones, because the Q wiped out their intelligence and stunted their brains so that they could never regain sentience, so they didn't suffer like the mantelopes did. The lizard herders survived in symbiosis with some herbivorous reptiles, and while the lizard herders stayed simple-minded, the reptiles evolved, slowly growing stronger and smarter. The Q twisted humanity into a variety of aquatic creatures. There were limbless eel people and whale-like behemoths, and horrifying multitudes of brainless wallowers that served as food stock. Most of them went extinct when the Q left, but the swimmers survived, feeding on fish and crustaceans in their world's oceans. They didn't look much like humans, but human eyes peered through their blubbery eyelids, and they spoke to each other, though underwater they couldn't hear each other's words. The Tempters were so fucked up it's a wonder they survived at all. The Q made them into bizarre living decorations, 2-meter-tall cones of flesh like grotesque carnivorous plants. Those were the females. The males were mindless little monkey imp creatures who blindly served their queen, controlled by vocal and pheromonal signals. They'd gather the food and guard their queen, and occasionally they would mate by descending into this breeding tube like a subway commuter. It was weird, but it worked, and the Tempters' mound forests spread across their world. They could have built some kind of civilization, but they were obliterated by a stray comet, and one of humanity's best and weirdest hopes died out. The Bone Crushers looked like monsters, like giants or ogres with beaks derived from teeth. They only ate putrefying meat, and they communicated by defecating on each other. But they were actually pretty successful. They reached a medieval level of civilization until they ran out of rotting meat to eat and eventually collapsed. When the Q attacked, most human worlds were quickly defeated, but one world fought back, resisting the Q 2 times before falling. The Q punished and humiliated this world for its resistance by making them into the Colonials. The Colonials were disembodied cultures of skin, connected with a network of basic nerves. The Q used them as living filtering devices, living off Q waste products. And for no other reason than to make the Colonials suffer, the Q left them with their consciousness and their eyes, so that they could fully witness their own wretched fate. For 40 million years, the Colonials suffered generations of misery, hoping for their own extinction, but they were made to be efficient, and so they spread across the planet in quilt-like fields of human flesh. The Q made lots of flying human species, some like bats or pterosaurs, others like angels or demons dancing through the ether, or strange, ugly creatures that floated on glands full of gas. One species, called the Flyers, had a special starfish-shaped heart that processed oxygen so efficiently that they had enough energy to support flight as well as human-like brains. Other flying species weren't so lucky. The hand flappers had wings that were useless for flying, but also couldn't be used as hands. All they could do was flap about to display their sexual availability, and so they ecstatically flashed and danced their way to extinction. Some humans tried to escape the queue by hiding underground. The queue found them anyway, and made them into subterranean, mousy Morlock people called the Blind Folk. They used whiskers and long fingers and big ears and banshee-like screams to navigate in the dark. They lived off fungi and fish, and avoided predation by bats and crocodilian creatures. These albino troglodytes looked fairly human, but where their eyes should have been, there was nothing but haunting, smooth skin. Eventually, the movement of tectonic plates crushed these underground habitats one by one. On a planet with extremely high gravity, the Q made the Lopsiders, flat, deformed, asymmetrical creatures right out of the fever dreams of Picasso, Dali, or Bosch. The Lopsiders crawled along the ground on 3 hands, with another limb used as an antenna. One eye stared straight up, while the other eye scanned ahead. As wretched as they looked, the Lopsiders thrived on their heavy world. They domesticated some native creatures and began the long road to civilization. On a moon with very low gravity, the Q made the Striders, enormously tall, thin creatures who walked among huge trees that towered like skyscrapers. The Striders were very delicate, so even with low gravity, a fall could shatter their bones. The Striders were eventually wiped out by a bunch of chickens who, over 2 million years, evolved into deadly predators. On another world, where the humans temporarily resisted the Q punished the humans by creating an array of parasites, who were also made from humans. There were tortoise-sized, vampire-like ambulatory parasites, and smaller parasites that lived attached to their hosts. There was even one horrific parasite that infested the wombs of its victims. Many of these parasite life cycles were so elaborate and baroque that they went extinct as soon as the Q left. But some of the parasites survived and developed a symbiosis that benefited their hosts as well as themselves. One human species evolved on a world of great archipelagos, calm, shallow oceans sprinkled with countless islands. The fingerfishers evolved to catch fish with their long fingers adapted into fish hooks, and ate them with long snouts full of needle-sharp teeth. And their evolution would get even weirder later on. The hedonists were created by the Q to be their pampered pets, living carefree lives of pleasure. Their world was a tropical paradise of succulent fruits and lakes of sweet bacterial juice. They were the only animals on their planet and had no predators or competition to deal with. Under normal conditions, this might lead to overpopulation, but the Q designed the hedonists to only get pregnant after mating an enormous number of times. So the population was stable, and the hedonists filled their lives with eating, sleeping, and mind-blowing sex. Their minds were blissfully empty, because who needed to think when they're having such a good time? The insectophagi adapted to eat insects. They had claw-like hands to dig, long tongues to scoop up bugs, and leathery faces to protect from bites. They lived quiet, unnoticed lives on their obscure world, but little did they know, they would play a key role in the fate of humanity. When the Q attacked, not all humans were captured. Some of them escaped into space and built homes inside hollowed-out asteroids. They adapted to zero gravity by growing long, spindly limbs, and pressurized digestive systems so that they could move around in space by farting from their highly evolved sphincters. These spaces changed to the point where they could never return to a planet with gravity, but they didn't care. They were comfortable in their weightless void worlds and paid little attention to their human relatives on the planets below. So across the galaxy, these twisted post-human species struggled to survive. They evolved, diversified, rose and fell, and most of them died out without the universe ever knowing they existed. Which is normal. Extinction is just as natural as speciation, and for each species that died out, new ones evolved to take their place, generating an ever-changing kaleidoscopic variety of life forms. And from this endless churn of life and death, some species rose up to achieve new kinds of sentience and civilization, like stars emerging from a dark fog. The scorching hot planet of the worms eventually cooled down, and life emerged onto the surface. The worms filled new ecological niches, evolving into serpentine grazers, swimmers, predators, and eventually people with human-like intelligence. The snake people had unique spiral-shaped brains that allowed them to observe and understand their world. They developed a hand derived from their ancestors' feet, and they built vast cities of tightly intertwined tunnels and homes. They enjoyed books, and music played as vibrations in the ground. The snake people may have looked alien, but their daily lives were full of joys and sorrows, hopes and dreams. Humanity. The predators evolved into the killer folk. Their deadly claws became grasping hands, and their saber teeth receded into organs of social display. Killer folk society was built around hunting and violence, and so their history was filled with war. For thousands of years, nomadic warriors with vast herds of once human livestock battled each other across a chessboard of continents. So their world is an archaeologist's dream, rich with the ruins of fallen kingdoms. But one faction of killer folk developed factory farming and rejected their violent past for a more peaceful, unified future. Some conservative factions kept to the old way, fanatically devoted to traditional warfare and hunting. These two factions came dangerously close to global conflict, but the killer folk managed to reconcile and survive. Underwater, the swimmers couldn't make fire, so they made a different kind of technology. They learned to breed their tools and machines. The tool breeders domesticated and modified other sea creatures, and built entire cities powered by organic life. Huge heart-like creatures pumped nutritious fluids through a network of self-healing conduits, like a living power grid. The breeders' homes were made from living shell and bone, with bioluminescent lights. They had televisions derived from cephalopod skin, medicinal sea squirts, weapons made from mollusks that fired teeth as ammunition. With genetic modification, stem cells, and tissue cultures, the tool breeders mastered the oceans, and even the small land masses of their world. But they weren't content with just one planet. The tool breeders grew living spaceships and reached for the stars. The lizard herders were stunted and never achieved sentience. But the lizards thrived and eventually built civilizations, using the humans for transport, labor, and food. These lizards had no biological connection to humanity, but they took on a human-like cultural identity because they were influenced by the ruins of the Star People on their world. They realized what the Q had done to the humans and feared that if the Q returned, they might suffer the same fate. For millions of years, the colonials were helpless fields of flesh, carpeting the shores of their world like algae. But they were resilient, and eventually they organized themselves, evolving from a homogeneous mass into differentiated colonies. Each cell specialized to perform different functions for the colony, and the colonies started competing against each other. Some colonies grew taproots to siphon resources from afar, or starfish-like feet to move around, or claws and poisons to attack other colonies. The winner of this evolutionary arms race was an intelligent colony called the Modular People. In their vast industrial megalopolis, the people took a wide variety of shapes and sizes. They could combine themselves, or split apart, or exchange parts, all interchangeable cells playing a role in one great organism. So the Modular People achieved the impossible, turning their miserable existence into a utopia where billions lived happy lives as part of the unified whole. The Flyers diversified into many different species, as predators, herbivores, even swimmers. One species were like storks who waded through swamps to catch their prey. Their versatile feet, which had evolved to catch slippery fish, became articulate hands as they developed intelligence and society. Since these Terrasapiens could fly, they had a global mindset. Borders and nations made no sense when it was so easy to travel freely. People and ideas spread quickly across their planet, and they built an egalitarian society without strict social classes. They built cities of perches and fluting towers, harnessed nuclear power, and farmed their relatives on the ground for food. Though their civilization thrived, their bodies struggled to support their highly developed brains and their power of flight, so the Terrasapiens usually died by the age of 23. Keenly aware of their mortality, they appreciated every moment of their lives. Their philosophers pondered the meaning of life with feverish intensity, rapidly filling libraries with their tomes. The Terrasapien in this picture poses at a seaside resort. This 10-day vacation was the only holiday in her short life. Despite the crushing gravity of their world, the Lopsiders built an advanced civilization. Their pancake-flat buildings spread all over their world, and they developed spaceflight so that they could escape their planet and its oppressive gravity. To adapt to life on new worlds, they engineered a subspecies of themselves who could live in low gravity, called the Asymmetric People. The Asymmetric People thrived in the freedom of new worlds, but they had no love for their creators. The Asymmetric People